is Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 through 33. Immediately, he made the disciples get into a boat and go on ahead to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and saying, "It's a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. So this past week, my family and I took advantage of it being summertime and the hospitality of some nice people, and got to go up to South Dakota for the week, which was really lovely. Now, South Dakota isn't Montana, but it is lovely all in its own way. And one of the things that we had planned to do while we were there is to do a little bit of hiking. And one of the places where I really enjoy doing that is in the Badlands National Park. Because unlike the national parks that I'm used to, like Yellowstone and all those kind of places where you're very clearly told to stay on the path, Badlands is such a wide open and ever-changing environment that you are basically mostly allowed to go pretty much wherever you want. And the children definitely enjoy that freedom, right? We let them out of the car, and we're like, next to this little hill thing, and they're like, "We can just run up there?" I'm like, "Yeah, you can." And then off they went, right? And they all turned into, these three children who would spend most of the car ride there staring at screens the entire time, suddenly turn into three little mountain goats, and are just running all up and down these hills. And so we're doing this and we're having a good time. And we had decided that, one of the things that I wanted to do is like, while we're here, we'll do a little bit of hiking. Right? It's not a very big park. There's not, anything like that. So we'll go down, and there's this one trail called Castle Trail that kind of takes you by a bunch of really pretty stuff. At least it looks like on the map it does. And that we were like, okay, let's go there. So we find the parking area and we cross over, and the trail, you're kind of in this like vastness of like little canyons and little buttes sticking up, and then there's waterways and channels that when it does rain there, it hadn't rained for a while, so there wasn't a lot of water, but a lot of channels that had formed over time. And somewhere over in the distance, was the trail, and you were clearly meant to like walk through a portion of this kind of wide open space with all the hills and everything before you get to the trail. And so I look at the map and I look at my watch, and I get my east and my west backwards in my head, which turned out to be a problem. And so instead of heading slightly this way, which was the direction we were meant to head to get to where the trail was going, we headed more like that way. Through the open land, which does not, by the way, lead to the trail. Instead, it leads to increasingly more difficult little canyons and valleys and things that you have to walk through. But at this point, we're kind of fairly dedicated to what we're doing, and there's a direction we're going, and nobody really wants to backtrack. Well, at least, Emily and I didn't really want to backtrack. And Isaac, the small little mountain goat we brought with us, he had no problem with any of it. He's up, he's down, he's all over the place, having a grand old time. The girls are a little less sure. So we persevere, we kind of keep going, and we realize this scrambling up and down the hill thing really isn't working out for those of us who are maybe a little older. And so we're like, well, let's just follow one of the creek beds. That's got to lead somewhere, right? And it did, kind of. So we end up just kind of traversing our way through the creek bed, but we'll get to these spots, and each and every one of us, with the exception of Isaac, who was nonplussed by the whole thing, each of the rest of us all had at least one moment where we looked at something that we clearly knew we needed to do, either go up something or down something or across something, and look at that thing at that moment and say, I can't do that. Right? There was one moment, there was this kind of big open area, and there was this deep little canyon, but it was only like 3 feet across. And, the girls kind of get over it, and Emily gets over it, and she's like, just jump over it. She looks back at me, and I'm looking at it, and she's like, just jump over it. And I'm like, I don't know if you remember, but they made a whole movie about this. White men can't jump. So, but she's like, you can do it. And I'm like, no. And so I'm scrambling down. I find another route, and I kind of have to go down and then scramble back up. And my pants are all dirty by the time we're done. And it takes 20 minutes longer than it should. And so I have that moment. At one point, Vivian falls down and she scrapes her leg all up. And, so she got first blood that day. And so she's trying to like half limp and do all this other stuff. And we get through this particularly tricky bit. We get finally to the top of this one little hill, and we're looking around going, I'm not sure where we're supposed to be now. And I'm like looking at my watch, and that was the moment when I realized I confused my east and my west, and I'm like, oh, we're supposed to be walking that way. Oops. And so we kind of reorient ourselves, and we figure out where it is that we need to go and how much is between us and there, and how much more up and down there is going to be to get to where we reasonably think we need to go. And I would say about half of us weren't terribly certain we were ever going to actually be able to get there. Should we turn around? Should we go back? We did decide, Emily and I made an executive decision, we're just going to keep on going. It's early in the day. We've got time. Let's see where this goes. And so we continue on the path. Actually, the picture before this one is the picture that we took. Yep. This is the picture we took when we finally found the trail that we were meant to find. Now, what you don't see in this picture is about 10 minutes before this, 2 of the 4 of us were in tears, right? Thinking, well, there's no way we can go forward. Vivi's about to just cut off her own leg, despite her, because it's just hurting so badly. But there was this moment where we're like, oh, we found the trail, we found where we were meant to go, right? And we're all very excited, and we start walking the trail back around, and it's, of course, up on top of all this stuff, so you don't actually have to walk through all the craziness if you don't want to. And we're walking in that trail, and then we get to this point where the trail clearly goes around this way to the parking lot. We can see the parking lot in our car from where we're standing. The trail goes out and around this way, or you have to cut back through a section of what we just did. And it was at that point that the 2 girls looked at me, the ones that had some of the hardest times, who were probably in the most pain and had the most panic the whole time we were doing this thing, look at me and they say, let's go that way, it's faster. And I'm like, well, that means walking through up and down the hills and stuff again. They're like, we're fine, we can do it, we know that now. Let's go that way, it looks faster. We want to be in the car and the air conditioning. And I'm like, okay. And so off we went. Now, somewhere along that little arduous trail that turned into a bit of more of a test of family togetherness than we meant it to be, we got in the car afterwards, and I'm like, well, at least we know how well our blended family is blending, because we got through that and no one died or was thrown off a cliff. All right. So apparently we're doing okay. But somewhere along that journey, our expectations, some of our expectations about what was possible, about what we could do and what we couldn't do, changed, right? What in the beginning, no doubt, if we had proposed walking through this one stretch at the beginning of the hike, some of the kids might have looked at us a bit suspiciously, wondering if they could even do that. After we had been through everything that we had been through in the previous hour and a half, we all looked at this piece of rough country and went, yep, we can do that. Our expectations somewhere in there about what is possible and what is impossible changed. And it was just in a small way, but we've all no doubt had these moments in our lives, right? Where we are faced with a task, there's something we need to do. Maybe it's in our personal life, maybe it's at work, maybe it is out on a trail, whatever it is. We look at something and go, that looks really, really hard. I'm not sure it's even possible to do that thing. And sometimes that's enough for us to say, well, then maybe we need to go find something else to do. You know, we could have always found an ice cream stand instead of taking off on the hike. Or if we choose to pursue it anyway, we will sometimes and oftentimes learn that what looks impossible to us is more possible than we imagined it to be. That is the moment that the disciples are having right now. And in fact, they're having a series of these moments. At this point in the gospel, there is a series of moments that happen with the disciples, with Jesus, where they are getting a different understanding of what it is possible for God to do, what is possible for Jesus to do, than what it is they had before. Because remember last week we talked about the fact that these fishermen choose to follow Jesus, even though they don't really have any idea about what it is that's going to look like or what it is that that's going to be. Right? They know it's probably going to be difficult. They know it's probably going to be challenging, but they don't know exactly what it is that Jesus is up to, and they don't know exactly what it is that is going to happen, and yet they choose to do it anyway. But the one thing, especially Peter and James and John as fishermen know, is one thing they do know is boats. So when Jesus takes the disciples at this story and pushes them out on a boat and says, you go ahead and cross, and I will join you later, there's a couple of things that they no doubt would know. One is how to get on in a boat, and how to get on a boat at night, because this is, as we heard, they were traveling across the water at night, which was not an uncommon thing for fishermen to do. And then two, they would know how dangerous sometimes that can be, especially when the wind comes up and the seas rise, because we're not talking about a 40-foot, modern fishing boat, right? We're talking about something that to us would look a lot smaller, a lot simpler, and more like a, pleasant, rowboat for a pleasant time on a still lake, right? Not something to traverse rough season. So Peter and James and John probably know better than anybody the challenges that they're in for when the wind does pick up and the weather does turn and they're being tossed and to and fro all over the place. And no doubt they were all surprised, but Peter and James and John as fishermen even more so surprised when Jesus comes walking up to the boat, walking on water in a way that they have likely or never have seen anybody do before. Peter knows how crazy that moment is. Peter knows probably better than anybody the danger that he and the disciples are in, being in a little boat in stormy seas out in the middle of the water. And he knows how impossible it is that Jesus is literally walking towards them on top of the waves. And yet, Peter does something actually rather extraordinary. We can make this passage be about doubt. And we can look down at Peter for doubting Jesus. And sometimes that is how it is interpreted. I don't think that is the most fair interpretation. I think what's most important about this passage is not what happens at the end, but what happens in the beginning. When Peter looks at his situation, he looks at what's going on with Jesus, he sees Jesus walking towards him, and unlike the other 11 disciples who are in the boat with him, Peter says to Jesus, invite me out on the water with you, and I will come. Only one of them got out of the boat. And for a time, he is successful in doing something that he no doubt thought was impossible. Up until that moment, he saw Jesus walking across the water. The one thing he knew more than anything else was in stormy seas, where you want to be is in the boat. You certainly don't want to be out in the water. And yet, Jesus walks towards him and challenges his assumptions about what is and is not possible. And for a moment, he entertains the idea that this thing he sees Jesus doing is actually possible, and that it may actually be possible for him to join him. Now, Peter also has a very human response to all of this, which is in the middle of it, he kind of changes his mind, right? He gets out there, he's like, oh, wait, I'm not sure you can actually do this. And he starts to sink. And of course, Jesus is there to save him. We can focus, if we want, on the sinking. We can focus, if we want, on what looks like failure. But then I think we miss the most important thing, which is Peter is willing, unlike everybody else, to step out on faith and step out on the boat and at least try. Whether he makes it or not, or can do it on his own or not, or whether he actually gets all the way out to Jesus or not, almost doesn't matter. What matters is that he's willing to step out on the boat, and he's willing to expand his belief about what is possible and what is impossible. Jesus will have these moments with the disciples over and over again because he knows the work they are going to be asked to do. He knows how important that their calling is going to be. He knows the trials and the tribulations they're going to face, and he needs them to expand their imagination about what it is that Jesus and God is able to help you through. Because that is the only way the disciples are going to be able to do all the things that they wanted. Now, one of the other things that we did while we were in South Dakota is we visited Mount Rushmore. Now, I've done Rushmore before. Who's been to Mount Rushmore? Yeah, it's close by. So we decided to do it at night. And somebody had clued us in that if you go at the right time, then you can actually see them light up the mountain after the sun goes down. So we went early. We went in the evening after dinner, so we could watch them do this. And they play this little program beforehand. Now, on the way there, we were doing the thing that most people do, I imagine, on your way to Mount Rushmore, which is trying to remember which faces are actually up there. Right? Like you kind of take it as a given that Washington's up there, right? Like I'm pretty sure Washington's there and I'm pretty sure Lincoln's there. The other two are sometimes a little bit fuzzy. So it's Jefferson and Teddy Roosevelt, by the way, in case you remembered. We struggled with it for a little bit, but we eventually remembered once we got there. And they play this little video before they do the lighting up of everything. And they talk about the different accomplishments of the presidents that are up there and why they're there and how they represent different sections of history. In the United States, and they get to Teddy Roosevelt. And one of the things that they talk about and highlight a lot about Teddy Roosevelt, obviously, is his love and his the creation of the national parks, because we're in the middle of a national monument, so that makes sense. And the other thing they talk a lot about in that is the Panama Canal, which I don't know is something that Teddy Roosevelt is as remembered for as he is some other things. But Teddy Roosevelt really was instrumental and in helping the United States to see the importance of the Panama Canal and getting it built in the first place. Now, if you don't remember your history, the French actually tried to build the Panama Canal for about 20 years before we got involved. They had built the Suez Canal and thought they knew what they were doing and realized there was another really potential important opportunity for a canal, and that was in Panama. And so the same guy who built the Suez Canal got into his mind that he was going to build a canal in Panama and went and got a lot of support. And because he had been successful, right, and because he had learned to do it in a certain way, they thought, oh, okay, just go do what you did in Egypt over there. Well, if you don't know, Panama looks nothing like Egypt, right? It is the same idea. Let's dig a big hole in the ground so we can put ships through it. But everything else is fundamentally different, which is why it takes the French 20 years of tramping around, hundreds, if not thousands, of lives of workers lost to basically dig about a mile-long trench and then eventually give up and abandon the whole project. It was widely reported for 20 years, the progress or lack thereof of this canal, not just in France, but around the world, because everybody recognized that it was important. And the understanding was that the premier canal builders in the world were the French, and if they couldn't do it, then nobody could. And that was the pronouncement across, and that was the general understanding really across the world. And yet, when Teddy Roosevelt unexpectedly becomes president, he only becomes president because of the assassination of William McKinley, becomes president, he makes building the Panama Canal a priority of his administration because he knows how important it is. And he thinks that America is able to do something that everyone else thinks is impossible. And so he does a couple of extraordinary things in order to make that happen. One of the first things he does is in 1906, he actually visits Panama. Now, for us today, that doesn't sound like a big deal. But you have to remember, this is 1906. There are not airplanes, let alone Air Force One. That's not a thing, right? And in fact, Teddy Roosevelt's visit to Panama to see the canal and the project is the first time any U.S. president has traveled abroad during their time in office. Before 1906, no U.S. president left the borders of the United States the entire time that they were in office. Teddy Roosevelt is the first one to do it because he understands that he needs to see what's going on and understand what's going on so he knows how to support it the right way. And so not only does he go and see and get the tour that everybody gets, he actually sneaks out. He actually slips his Secret Service detail and he sneaks out, and it goes to talk to the workers and see what's really going on and what the challenges are and what they actually really need. There's this rather famous picture. I couldn't find it this morning when I was looking, but there's this famous picture of him driving a steam shovel. And people assume that this moment of him driving a steam shovel was like set up for like publicity purposes. It was not. He had snuck out, he had found somebody, and he had found a worker who was willing to show him how to operate his steam shovel. Again, 1906 steam shovel, right? Not like what we're thinking about today. And with all this experience and everything that he understands that there are things that are really, really important to the success of this project that hadn't been taken into account before. One of the biggest things is the disease. There's a lot of malaria, there's a lot of yellow fever. It really takes a toll on the workforce. And he gets the right person in charge who has the right ideas, and he begins to support it in the way that actually needs to be supported. And over time, even though in the beginning it was seen as a folly, even in the beginning it was seen as something stupid to try to do, everyone had decided that building this canal was impossible. Teddy Roosevelt, because he went down there and he saw it, and he talked to people, and he understood the project, and he got the right people in the right places, and was able to inspire them to do work that they themselves no doubt weren't sure they could do on their own. We today have the gift of an incredible piece of infrastructure that literally changed the world. There are no doubt many things we all carry in our minds, many beliefs we have about what is possible and what is impossible, what is possible for us or what is impossible for us as individuals, as a community, as a church, whatever it is. Peter chooses to open his mind to the possibility of something that he previously never would have entertained as possible. The most important thing about the story of Peter in the boat is not the part where he sinks, because we all have those moments where we sink. The most important part of the story isn't when Vivi fell down and hurt herself in the middle of the canyon. The most important part of the story is when she got up and kept going. The most important part of the story is when Peter steps out of the boat in the first place and is willing to take a very unsteady and unsure step on faith. We all have things that we assume can't be done. Or, more importantly, we all have things that we assume we are not capable of doing. We must also recognize that God's perspective might be a little different. So it behooves us all to occasionally ask ourselves the question, is there something that Jesus is trying to help me understand about myself, my church, my community, whatever it is? Is there somewhere that God is trying to tap us on the shoulder and say, you know that thing that you think you can't do? You might, if you trust and have faith in me, be surprised at how well it goes. It will not be perfect. You may find yourself sinking from now and then, but part of having faith in Christ and faith in the way that Peter had it was one, faith and belief that Jesus makes things possible that is otherwise not, but also faith and belief that when we are stepping out on faith, we are trying to do new things, when we are trying to expand our understanding of what is possible and what is not, Jesus is not only there to guide us, but Jesus is there to cab us when we fall and when we start to sink. And when we have faith like that and faith like Peter, we might be surprised how far we as individuals and we as a community are able to go. Amen.